according to this. Uh, so great, welcome. Good to be together with um, a couple of people from St John's Hoxton. My name's Reverend Graham Hunter. If you are watching this at some other point, Vicar of St John's Hoxton. Rob Adediran is here with us. Rob has been a member of our church for about the last 14 years until a recent move out of London, but has also been very involved in school governance in Hackney and our local school. Ella is here to learn a little bit more about that part of our congregation, and Penny Roberts, director of the London Diocesan Board for Schools, to share a bit more of the broader picture about school governance. So if you are watching this back at some point, that's who we all are, and we're just going to have a little conversation over the next 20 minutes or so about school governance and Christian mission, and why as Christians in churches we might want to be involved. Let me begin with a prayer. Father, we thank you for the precious task and calling given us as a society to nurture and raise children and young people, to help them grow to fullness of life. And we thank you for the work of our schools across the whole of our city, across all of our communities, but especially those that are connected to our churches and for which we have a special care. Help us to think about the work of school governance and about how we can cast a vision of life in the kingdom of God, life in all its fullness, and the way of Jesus Christ and life in the Spirit, for children, for staff, for parents and communities in which we serve. So we just commit this time to you and pray that it will be insightful and inspiring for each of us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So very briefly, I suppose what I wanted to kind of share to begin with was my own reflection on 15 years, I suppose, of school governance. Having been a youth worker before I was ordained, I had some experience of being involved in schools. I'd worked with a Christian schools mission organisation that used to go in and do assemblies and collective worship and RE lessons and support like that. So I had some youth work experience of going into schools, but only when I began ministry here in St John's Hoxton did I begin that task of serving on a governing body. Wasn't my very first experience, actually. The slight geek that I am, when I was 16 years old, I was appointed to be the student council representative on the governing body of my secondary school. So I spent a couple of years attending governors meetings when I was a teenager, but don't hold that against me. And I think over the years, I have seen the impact and the difference that really engaged governance can make in the life of a school. Part of our story here was a very testing and challenging time in the early days, 2010, when I started here. The school had gone through some quite tumultuous times in relation to leadership and finance. And it really did need a bit of new vision and a bit of encouragement for the leadership team and support. Just sort of steady pair of hands, I suppose. And I think part of my role in the earliest years was to be available and present, to be in the school, to encourage, to be a sounding board for the head of school as was, and then head teachers in due course. And I think I had a very peculiar role for a few years with our local primary school, in that I was a dad. So I was taking my children and dropping them off in the playground and getting to know other parents. I was the vicar who was doing collective worship and school services and visiting for RE lessons and the like. But I also had that governance role. And so I had to learn quite quickly what the governance piece meant. And in some of the training that I did, some of the training offered by the Diocesan Board for Schools and some of the other training bodies that support school governors, I think the thing I found most helpful in the early days was to think about these three key tasks of the governing body: to be involved in setting the vision and ethos for the school, and in the case of a Church of England school, paying particular attention to that distinctive Christian vocation to education that we have, seeking to develop inquisitiveness, seeking to have a kind of character-based approach to education. Second was about support and challenge for the senior leadership, appropriate support and challenge. And really, my experience has been that's about developing good working relationships, supportive friendships, being available to sit and have a coffee and a catch up and a chat, but also being able to ask, you earn the right to ask some of those challenging and probing questions about strategy and direction when you've shown that you're there to give support as well. And then finally, the third key objective that I learned about early on was about really ensuring that our kind of financial probity and systems were all correct and in place. And I think I'd extend that to include things like, I think, safeguarding policy and how we do all of our kind of responsibilities around special educational needs delivery and provision. So those pieces of work to make sure that we are running a tight ship. It's been the privilege of the time that I've spent to have been involved in the recruitment of several head teachers and deputy head teachers, being involved in sitting on interview panels, and I think that's a really key way that governors can be involved. It's ultimately school leadership. Rests, the culture of school leadership will rest very significantly with the senior leader, the head teacher, the deputy head teacher who are there. So I think trying to work out who will be an appropriate appointment and discerning that carefully is a key responsibility that falls to school governors. And then finally, I think as a school governor here in Hoxton, and I should also say serving across a federation of schools, which is not going to be the case everywhere, but was the case for us to be part of a federation of schools, so having a full governing body and then a local board. Not the case in every school. But I think to be in frequently, visiting, watching the children, seeing the teachers in action, spotting things which are sort of exemplary and calling them out and celebrating them, making sure that we are known to teachers and staff so that they feel like their work is embedded in a local community in a wider context. And of course, in my case as a vicar, that's also very much about making sure that the work of education is rooted in the whole community and providing that sort of link. So it's been a great privilege to be involved in school governance. I've learned a lot over the years, and I think it's a way in which we can, I suppose I said this is school governance and Christian mission. I suppose for me as a Christian, it also feels like a way in which I can work with fellow governors who may or may not, across a federation, across different governing bodies, may not have an active Christian faith, they may not be practicing, but they can see me mucking in, being available, being willing to serve. Same with the teachers. There'll be teachers who work in our schools who will have sympathy with our Christian ethos, but may not be practicing Christians. And they need to know that we're available to encourage, to support. We're not sitting in judgment. We want to just be friends and colleagues in the work of raising children and supporting our communities. That's a bit about my experience, but I'd love, Rob, for you to share, because you've really been, in the last few years, much more involved than me. And I'd love for you to reflect on, particularly, I think, the relationship between being on a full governing body and chairing the local board.
Yeah. I I think as well, kind of asking like, what's your motivation? Like, why do we get involved in this? What's the driver for you? And I remember, Graham, you and I talking about kind of work and things that are valuable in society and things we can do in the community. And I've worked quite a lot in education and spent lots of time with head teachers and in and around schools. And I became like very persuaded that one of the best things we can do in society is contribute to well-run community schools, because everybody goes to school. We spend lots of time there, and getting school right, getting primary education right is just absolutely essential, because it can transform lives, and it can be that thing which can make a generational shift. You know, we work in communities where lots of adults are really struggling, they're having a tough time. And one of the things that school can do is help support those adults as parents, so that their children don't have the same kinds of experiences that they had necessarily. And that sounds, I don't know how that sounds. I think the reality of that is that it's incredibly difficult to do. It takes courageous leadership, but it can be done. And it's one of the things I love about St. John's is that they see the whole child. Ella, one of the things that surprised me most about getting involved with schools was how much they do outside of education. So what we would call education is like a fraction of what happens. They are social workers, they are psychiatrists, they are, providing food, they're going out into the community just to check that families are okay if they haven't heard from them. I mean, it's phenomenal what they do, and it really opens your eyes to that critical role that schools play, just like plugging gaps in society. Um, and good, well-run schools just see that as part of their job. And yes, there's the whole thing of, a child isn't going to concentrate at school unless they've had a good meal. So we'll provide them with some breakfast and access to kind of warm clothes, etc. So that there is that sense in which we're doing this in service of education. But the adults at schools are really doing it because they love the children and it's the right thing to do and they can, and that I think is so inspiring and so powerful. So as always with this stuff, it's if you're going to volunteer your time, you need to understand like what your why is and make sure it's a powerful one that will get you through reading all of the papers and turning up on time to the meetings, because sometimes you need to be reminded of that. Graham, you I think listed really neatly kind of three kind of key areas that governors have to engage with and respond to and show leadership in. I think maybe just two others that occurred to me when I was kind of prepping for this call. And then I can perhaps talk a bit about the difference between being on a governing board and a lab, if that's useful. But two things that I've found are, one, providing an external perspective. And Ella, your professional skill set is important and is valuable in a school. And your experience of being a professional in a setting outside of education actually really matters, because education is this bubble. Like, things happen in education that just don't happen anywhere else. And some of it's a bit strange. I think it could use a bit of a shake-up. And some of it is remarkable. You're like, wow, that's really exemplary practice. I'm going to take that back to my world of work. But I've often found it helpful having the confidence to say, oh, I know my experience is nothing to do with schools, but when we're recruiting, like, some of the things that we find really helpful are X, Y, and Z. And sometimes there's a really good reason why schools can't do it like that. And sometimes you've got an idea which actually translates really well and just kind of helps with the professional running of the institution. So that I found to be really great. And it took me a bit of a while to have the confidence in a room of very skilled professionals who are brilliant at what they do to say, I've got a bit of a left field idea from somewhere else. Shall we give it a go? But having built up those relationships within the school, you then have the permission to suggest things that might be a bit wild or just a bit different. And that's something which, when we're recruiting governors or thinking about like onboarding people to the kind of the volunteer team, that we always encourage, like, bring your skill set because it's valuable. And I think the second thing which has been really important for me to learn, which has taken a bit of a while, is kind of my role in supporting the head teacher kind of mainly, but also other senior leaders, just kind of personally checking in on their well-being, making sure that they are have the professional support around them. So there's a whole structure around head teachers, which is particularly good, I think, at SJB with the federation system. But making sure that they are thinking about their well-being, that they're kind of having lunch, they're having regular tea breaks, that they're not just all consumed by the job, because it's a huge job, it's a huge responsibility, and the head teachers are very responsible people, and so they will put themselves at the bottom of the pile. And I think really you want to be able to build a relationship such that you can tell when you're stepping into a meeting with your head teacher. There might be a very full agenda, but you can tell when actually you just need to go off piste and say, let's just talk about how you're doing. Or it sounds like that meeting that you just glibly retold to me, like, that was actually quite a difficult one. Should we do a bit of real-time processing, because I'm here to be kind of your partner in that. And I think that's been something which I think has been valued in how I've contributed to the school, and where again I felt like I've added a little bit of value, because our schools are competently run, lots of things work really well, and so I think it is about finding those ways that you can add something different. So skill set, and also being willing to be kind of a personal kind of partner, colleague to the senior leaders, to me is really critical. So briefly on the kind of local school, so chairing the board, the local advisory board, which is what I did for maybe 5-6 years, versus the governing board. I think the main confusion is just getting them straight in your mind, and again dealing with double sets of acronyms. I think at SJB the benefit is that the governing board does a lot of really great thinking around kind of policy and structure, which can then be passed down to the school. So there's a consistent approach. And sitting on that board, I've been really impressed by the thoroughness of the work, by the level of debate. There's quite a lot of safety within the room, so challenge is high but constructive, all of which is fantastic. So it means we're setting policies which then are cascaded down to the schools, and they're really tight, they're really good, they're thought through, and that's helpful. And then at a local level, when you're chairing the local advisory board, which is kind of old school, kind of school governors, you might say, it's just a single school setting. It's a slightly different role. It's about understanding much more kind of the local vision of the school, again, partnering with the head teacher so that you can really be a team. And when it comes to those big decisions, you've already worked it through with the head teacher, what the vision of the school is. There's been some good thought there. And then you're creating a space for kind of debate and discussion. You're kind of hosting and facilitating that. Yeah, they're different roles, but I think having the perspective of the governing board and the local advisory board is useful. So I think even if I wasn't on the governing board, auditing some of those meetings can be a valuable thing to do. Yeah, a couple of thoughts from me, but really happy to answer specific questions. I know there's some time for that at the end, or kind of riff on any other themes that seem relevant.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, as we said, what I put in a little kind of proposed agenda is we'll hear from Penny in a moment about the wider London setting. Then I think we can talk about some specific questions, needs, and Ella, get your contributions and thoughts or observations. I think I'm very aware for Ella's benefit, but also indeed who might watch this back. I think in our setting, a local advisory board, which sort of reports into the full governing body and the Primary Advantage Federation, the local advisory board members who act like local school governors meet 3 times a year, kind of for a formal meeting, but also come on learning walks where you come and visit the school. So the intention is to get into the school, see the children, and each local advisory board member is expected to take on some kind of link governance role so that they're coming and meeting with school leadership, with teachers, and that will be in line with the school development plan priorities. So we'll set each year priorities where we might say, look, actually, we really want to think about our SEND provision, special educational needs and disability provision, and we want to make sure that a link governor is going and doing this visit and reporting back to the governing body. So that's sort of the kind of commitments that people take on when they join the local advisory board, is coming to the meetings, but also coming to the learning walks once or twice a year, going and doing those link visits, which could be once a year, could be twice a year. And then I think wherever possible, like showing up at some of those events, like, Christmas fairs or carol services or special, or year 6 leavers services. We know that people have busy lives and different commitments, but I think the minimal is the core meetings, the link role, and those learning walks. So that might be helpful for others. And then, of course, if people become involved in a full governing body, you sort of almost layer up another layer of meetings and sometimes subcommittee roles. So when I did serve on the Primary Advantage Federation, I'd have all the local advisory board meetings, but then also all the Primary Advantage Federation governing body meetings. And I was on the Finance and Business Committee, and I would get pulled into panels dealing with disciplinaries or grievances or things. So, but that's like next level. Doesn't have to be that everywhere. Penny, do you want to tell us a bit about just the London school setting and what it's like trying to look after all these church schools in London Diocese?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. And thanks for inviting me. And actually, just what you and Rob have said is really inspiring. And actually, I think what you've done is you've given a real flavour of the breadth of being a governor and the difference that you can make. So I really appreciate the way you've both spoken. So I think when I was thinking about this, I want to start by talking about the special place that Hackney has in Church of England education and the sort of the impact that churches in Hackney have had in Church of England education over such a long period. So the Urswick School in Hackney, it's one of the oldest church schools in the country. It dates back to the Reformation, so they've just had their 500th anniversary. And Hackney was also the birthplace in 1811 of the National Society for the Education of the Poor. So Hackney itself and the Christian community in Hackney over centuries has had a massive impact. So the National Society is still going to get today. There's more than 5,000 Church of England schools in the country, and a lot of that can be traced back to the impact that the National Society had through a Hackney church in the early 1800s. And so I think the only thing I would add to the way you've both described the role of governor, I'm going to add an extra word in, and the word is stewardship. And I think that takes us into the bigger picture thinking. So I would say that through people like the wonderful folk in Hackney whose vision actually made such a difference to get Church of England education started. Church of England education has always been part of the fabric of the mission and the ministry and the vision of the church to serve the children of the communities, wherever there's a church, the children in those communities. And actually in this season, we've just been gifted the most wonderful inheritance of Church of England schools with deep roots in their communities, making a huge impact on the quality of education that children receive in London and well beyond it. So actually, as governors, I would say that the real role is around faithful stewardship in this generation, sort of really acknowledging the wonderful legacy that we've inherited, the buildings, the quality, the relationships, the history, the impact that those schools have had. And actually the decision making that governors do is not only to secure the quality of education now. The policies that governors set are about securing quality for the children in the building now. But actually a really good governing board is also making long-term decisions around the ongoing contribution of the Church of England in education in the community. So the wider context in London is more than 150 church schools, incredibly diverse, successful. So children who attend church schools in London make more progress, attain higher standards than they would do if they went to other kinds of schools, so statistically across London. So church schools in London really are making a fantastic contribution to the strength of education in London. And the education sector in London is facing some really sticky challenges. So the pupil roll is falling really significantly. Most London boroughs, Hackney included, are sadly closing schools. So again, tragically, a church school closed in Hackney, hundreds and hundreds of years old. Happening all over the place. School organisation is really changing. So you've talked quite a bit about your local federation. So schools that have been standalone schools for years are moving into partnerships and federations and multi-academy trusts, and the school landscape is really being redrawn. And through all of that, governors who are willing to, as you've both said really clearly, invest in the relationships, bring an outside perspective, actually the outside perspective that the church has around the faithful stewardship of Church of England education is a really wonderful thing. And the ability then to make decisions that are not in personal self-interest or in the self-interest of any member of staff of the school, but actually in the long-term interests of the community at a time when education is going through some hard things and people are having to make difficult decisions. So I think being a school governor is Rob says there's a lot to read. Graham has said there's time involved, but actually just a wonderful opportunity to be part of this kind of much bigger contribution of the church to education and to the upbringing and flourishing of children.
Thank you, Penny. That's really helpful. And so I think for our benefit, but for the benefit of anybody who catches up or watches this afterwards, I think we know that this is a really important and valuable way in which Christians in our churches can get involved in sort of leadership, Christian leadership beyond what we do in Sundays. And I know in church very often vicars like me are often trying to get people on the welcome team or the cafe team or the kids team or whatever it might be. I have to say I've tried as best I can, and Rob might tell me whether I've done it well or not, to sort of say if people in our church want to serve in school governance, I really want to encourage that, support that, and sort of say, don't, drop out of this team, drop it, you don't need to be on this, that, and the other rota. This is a real part of your vocation, your ministry, and your service. And I do think it's actually part of our witness and our mission to show the people that we live alongside, the neighbours, the staff, the teachers, the communities, fellow governors, that Christians care, whether we are trying to love our neighbour. Just as we are instructed and commanded. And the need is great. And I don't know any of the stats, but we know that in our own local advisory board for St John the Baptist Primary School, we know that for the Primary Advantage Federation, there will always be a need to recruit kind of good and able governors, people who are willing to learn, willing to put in the effort. But that will be true also for that's a primary sector, but we also have Church of England secondary schools that are looking to recruit governors. There'll be other primary schools across the diocese. And I know that the Diocesan Board for Schools has a sort of dedicated section on the website for people who'd like to find out more about governance and serving in that way. So we want to be generous and open-handed and say this is not just about trying to sort out governance for our own local school. What we want to do is contribute more widely. Ella, in a way, I think yours might be the most interesting thing now, which is after we've sort of waxed lyrical about how wonderful this all is, what are the kind of questions that emerge for you? Because you're very insightful, and what are your observations and questions that we might be able to respond to?
Yeah, well, thank you, first of all, each of you for sharing. It's lovely to hear. I think so much of what you shared has aligned so much with my values too, in terms of kind of that view of like the next generation, view of the importance of good leadership, right? That's the field that I work in. And also just the importance of community. I care very much about being a part of this local community. It's part of why I go to my local church. So thank you for what you shared. I guess the first question that I wanted to ask, I think you each touched a little bit upon the kind of characteristics that make someone a good governor, or, and part of this, of kind of bringing the skill set that you have, that kind of pastoral side that you mentioned, Rob, of kind of asking the right questions. But I guess I'd love to hear more of what you think makes a good governor, of kind of what are the skills or perspectives that you would need to bring to be successful in it, in terms of kind of meeting what ultimately the kids need, but the teachers need and the heads need too. Yeah, I'd be interested in kind of what those particular skills or attributes are.
Penny, do you want
to? Yeah, I'll give you one to start.
Thank
I think a brilliant school governor is somebody who can ask great questions. Because school governors don't get involved in the operational business of running schools. School governors are there to help the leadership to set strategy and vision, and at that level. So actually, how do you hold people accountable? If you ask great questions, then you don't need to know the answers, but you then get a sense of the quality of what's going on.
Brilliant. Rob, do you have another thing you'd add?
Yes, I think I think I would talk about confidence, like developing the confidence to then ask those questions. I think it can be quite intimidating being in a school because you know the least. There's a massive asymmetry of information, and you're rocking up and you don't know anything. You don't know the acronyms. And after a while, it gets embarrassing to ask because you've forgotten them, but keep on asking. So I think there is something about having the confidence to ask the question and to ask the follow-up question as well. And that, I think, and that's probably as far as I'd go, because I think everybody has something they can contribute. I don't think there's a specific skill set. From time to time, there might be skills that are needed on a board. And so we might try and recruit a particular set of skills that might help kind of broaden the kind of general knowledge base. But no one should count themselves out. I think brilliant, as Penny said, asking great questions. And then I would just say building that confidence to ask those questions if it doesn't feel like it's not kind of your instinct in a new setting.
Ella, it's a bit of a broken record response for me. I think it is about asking great questions. The only thing I suppose I would nuance is I think part of the point I found, particularly with link governor visits, when I go and meet with a safeguarding lead or a send coordinator, I'm asking questions and trying to learn, but knowing that when somebody has all of this knowledge in their mind all the time in operation, they get used to just using it without having to explain it. And actually explaining things clarifies and helps people refresh themselves on why they do what they do. It's that whole kind of conscious and unconscious competence question. So that I actually think one of the reasons we ask questions and we listen and we ask people to explain things is because that process also helps the leaders be really clear about what they're doing and why. Um, I think the only other thing I suppose I would add that makes a good governor is probably somebody who's willing to sort of also ask questions about change, and that can be very simple. I thought of you know, one example was often things like schema delegations for financial purchasing will come up on a governing body. There'll be a financial policy review, and things will happen like there'll be spend limits on what you need, you know, multiple estimates for, or what can be signed off by this person or that person. And sometimes they were set a decade ago or 15 years ago and haven't been adjusted for inflation. And I remember sitting in a full governing body once and saying, kind of, is £3,000 really like the right amount? Should that go to five? And I could see all the head teachers like breathing a collective sigh of relief because then, you know, it was like sometimes we just need to be willing to say, you know, tell me, is it right, or change that. So I think there's a willingness to say, you know, are we just stuck doing what we've always done, or do we need to revisit it? And sometimes there's outside knowledge that you can bring as well. And sometimes this has a really material effect. I remember some years ago knowing that the National Society had agreed with Unison. I think they'd entered into a covenant that all Church of England schools would be living wage employers. And just making sure that that sort of information filters down into policy setting so that when you are reviewing the contract cleaners, you know, you can say, can we just make sure this is also a living wage contract? And so you can sometimes bring some of that.
Thank you. That's helpful. One of the other questions I had was, I think naturally created quite a rosy view of what school governorship is, but I imagine it might be hard sometimes. And what are kind of the biggest challenges or kind of the hardest parts, I guess, of school governorship? There's none. That's brilliant. Perfect.
Shall I go first, Rob, on just and it's not been terrible. It's not been hard, but it's demanding and one that has to be dealt with quite care. One of the things that governors can be called upon to do is to be involved in grievance or disciplinary panels. And that's where you can find yourself in quite an interesting position where school leadership teams might be wanting to build a case around discipline around a member of staff. And you might have to challenge the school leadership on that and understand that there might be some problems, but then you know, it might not be fair to just take a single view of things. Now I resolved, serving on the federation, I resolved I would never play that role for our own local school, because actually my pastoral role as vicar in the community, you know, and there just that would undermine it. But often these panels and these proceedings happen during working hours, and so if you are the person who has control over your diary and schedule, you get called upon quite a lot. So I sat on quite a lot of sort of disciplinary or grievance panels over the years, and that's very demanding because that needs real care and attention, because you might be challenging the school leaders that you are also supporting.
Yeah, that is hard. I think that for me, the biggest challenge was around time management, to be honest, which sounds really boring, but it is important. One of the most important things we can do as governors is turn up on time, having read the papers. And that sounds really dull, but actually it means that you're able to perform in your role really effectively. And the reality is that most people won't have read all the papers and half the people will turn up late. So I think in terms of modeling what good governance looks like, I think that's what we do. Let's just get the basics right, because actually the school puts a huge amount of effort into every visit that we do, and it costs them a lot to set these things up. So we have to demonstrate that it's worthwhile. But I would say that although I did find it hard to do the diary management and to do those additional things that Graham mentioned, like going to celebrations, turning up at like summer fairs, every interaction I had with the school, almost without fail, gave me so much more than I expended. Like, I love being a governor. Like, it's so joyful, and I'm constantly like professionally inspired by the professionalism and dedication of the team, like emotionally uplifted by the energy in the school and the care that's expended on behalf of the children and families in our communities. I mean, it's unparalleled, the level of care, and that in the society that we live in is totally unsung, and it's incredibly refreshing. So it's absolutely worth it. I know I'm not here to sell it, but I also found that on those moments when I'd done less prep, I kicked myself afterwards because I felt frustrated, because you can't really contribute because there's too much happening. It's too detailed. You have to do the prep, otherwise you're just sitting on the sidelines, like watching a meeting happen, and then you kind of annoyed at yourself for not having been fully prepared. So for me, that was the big challenge, just to make sure that I'd kind of done the work in advance and I was ready to fully contribute every time I showed up.
So there's a saying that that people often overestimate the amount that they can achieve in the short term and underestimate the amount they can achieve in the long term. I think that can apply quite nicely to school governance. So I think what you've heard this evening actually is some of the brilliant ways that school governors make a massive difference, and that is absolutely true. But there are meetings where there'll be an absolutely massive stack of papers, and you might leave feeling like you haven't actually changed the world in the moment in that meeting, because actually what the governors did was approve some policies and read some papers and ask some questions and talk about the budget. And did that really change much? And I think Rob said it, really know what your why is, that actually over the long term governors do those big things. They either resolve grievances in a really dignified, orderly, sensitive way, or it's a bit of a mess. The leadership recruitment either happens in a really brilliant way, so all of those things, governors make a massive difference. But I think what's the challenge is, on a rainy Thursday night in the middle of January, when you've read us, you've been up late the previous night reading a massive stack of papers, and you leave and you think, well, we've passed a load of policies. Did that really make a difference? That there must be some challenging moments in there as well.
Yeah. Thank you. That's helpful. And then I just had one final kind of more practical question in terms of Graham, at the beginning, you mentioned that there are kind of 3 annual meetings, just the practicality of what those look like. I mean, obviously you've mentioned kind of reading papers, what's the expectation around how far you get those in advance, and kind of, are they kind of half day, are they evening, that kind of thing for the meetings?
Yeah. Good question. So very practically, they are typically between an hour and a half and 2 hours, typically 2 hours, I think we were, weren't we, Rob, on the whole? Though sometimes you might manage it. We actually worked on a rhythm the last few years of having a sort of 8 a.m. meeting once a year, and then I think usually 5:30 evenings, and there has been some provision for people to join online as well. So, and we've done that deliberately because for some people it's easier to start the working day with that meeting. And also because very often we have school leadership who are then having to stay back for governors meetings, and if we start too late, that all of our school leaders are in at 7, half 7, and if we're keeping them till 7:38 in the evening, it's not doing their well-being any good either. Papers are always circulated at least a week in advance, and often slightly longer than that. We have a couple of resource tools. We use a website called, it used to be called like Owl Governor or something like that. Governor Hub. It had an owl as a logo, and so all the papers go up there. And obviously one of the parts we play is, if we're a link governor, we have to do, and we are on the sort of rota to present our link governor report. It's really important we do that timely, like Rob said, modeling it. So yeah, that's kind of what it looks like. Yeah. So, and then the school, if there is a learning walk, which we really do try to kind of encourage everybody to be participating in, because that's really where you see the teaching, you see the classroom environment, you see the children, you make those observations about what's the kind of culture and climate of the school. Not just what the head teacher's telling you, but what you're observing with your eyes. That we typically try to join that to the early morning meetings. So we might meet at 8, and then at 9:30 we might then start going and visiting classrooms for another hour and a half. So that morning could be a longer bit. I know that people have, depending on their professional life or life stage, they have different capacities for what they can join in with. Some employers will give sort of leave to serve. So some will allow you the flexibility and it's not having to take annual leave. Others, I know some people do have to either take time off or work later.
Yeah.
It would depend on each person's circumstances, I suppose.
Brilliant. Thank you. Those were the questions that I had. Appreciate it.
I mean, I think that Rob and I are incredibly biased towards this work because we have got an extraordinary school at St John the Baptist Primary School, and Rob, I think, has articulated it really well. The care, the joy is second to none, really, and it is a real privilege to have been involved in that. And it is a school which I suppose has gone on that journey and has outstanding attainment results. And I think this year's SATs results were amongst the highest in the borough and even further. But also, I suppose what strikes me is that when we have Ofsted reports, when we have those sort of inspections and formal visits, what they're noting is that in our school, children come first. There's a very child-centered approach to education. There's real, genuine care. So it's been a real sort of privilege to have been involved. So one thing I suppose I would commend to you, Ella, but others who might watch this who are thinking about St John the Baptist serving there or in the Primary Advantage Federation would be go to the Ofsted website, read some of the reports, see what those introductory comments are. That'll give you a bit of a flavour. And certainly in St John the Baptist case, I'd feel very proud. It's a document that really reflects on the beauties of the school culture there.
One thing I just wanted to add is that Graham, you kind of even more so than me have been at the school and kind of been holding, Penny talks so well about it, this kind of the stewardship of the school. And Penny, you were talking about kind of centuries, like Graham hasn't been around that long, but you've held the kind of ethos of the school and the particular relationship between the school and the church so securely for 15 years. And actually, something about London schools, Ella, is that there's often quite a high turnover because it's expensive to live in London, and people might come to London to learn because it's an incredible learning environment because the schools are really special, but may well then kind of move elsewhere to kind of progress their career. So governors are often, some of the adults in the school community who have been around for the longest. And I think something that can be quite tricky to think of is, and I don't think you need to because it could be a bit off-putting, but there's something really valuable sticking around, seeing this not as a kind of a 12 to 18 month project, but something which perhaps doesn't, when you start, like have an end date in mind. I remember when I started St. John's, I think the term was maybe 3 or 4 years, which felt like such a big commitment. I was like, oh my gosh, how can I do anything for that long? And the only thing that's made me leave really has been a relocation. I would stay in kind of any number of roles because it gives so much back. But I've also really seen the importance of like being there, holding that narrative, that kind of institutional memory. And it's one of those really powerful things that governors can do as well. You kind of sit on, you've got a slightly different time horizon to, the head potentially or kind of other senior leaders. So that's, I think, been really valuable.
Thank you.
I love this conversation, and it's very rich and full, and I hope that it's been nice for all of us. Not too self-congratulatory, but just kind of encouraging and warm, but helpful to you, Ella, and hopefully helpful to others who might look. I'm really aware that I haven't time kept us at all, so that's why I'm not the chair of the governing body. I haven't time kept us, but it would be good to end there so that we can get on with the rest of our evenings. But Penny, thank you for coming and being with us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all your wisdom, all of you. I appreciate it.
Rob, you have been a wonderful servant of the Federation and St John the Baptist Primary, and we miss you loads. So, Rob, would you mind praying for us as we close?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Thank you.
Jesus, thank you that you kind of model so brilliantly kind of a love for children, and you invite children and have done since your ministry kind of kicked off to come to you. And Lord, I pray that you would give us that mandate as well, that we would be inspired to just invite children and their families just to come as they are without any expectations that they are more grown up or better behaved or like more on time, but that we would just welcome them as fully fledged kind of people and members of our society. And that we'd do that by taking governance seriously, by continuing to contribute to our school communities in whatever way we can, we thank you, as Penny reminded us, for the incredible legacy of Christian ministry through education in Hackney. Like, I didn't even know those really interesting stories, but how amazing to be part of that legacy, which is so deep and speaks to us so much of your faithfulness to our communities, to our families, and to our children. So, Lord, we ask that you would bless the children of London, and in this particular context, the children of Hackney and of St. John the Baptist, their teachers, their families, and the community that we all love and serve. In Jesus' name, amen.